Ultra processed foods as a group tend to be associated when we look at populations with poorer health outcomes from diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease, and even cancer. And so again, even though I said we should be careful not to overgeneralize, it is true. Things in a box, things in a can, things, that are manufactured at scale and intended to sit on the shelf for months or maybe even years tend to draw the attention, my attention anyway, that it really is worth reading the label and knowing what it is you're putting in your body. So ultra processed foods, I think alcohol is another thing that is popular. It's social. I mean, look, if you look at beer and wine, these go back millennia as part of human culture. People sat and distilled and fermented beer and wine for thousands of years, in the Colosseum in Rome. They're still doing excavations to figure out what the gladiators actually ate and drank. And they find inside there, wine casks and things like that. Like it's a cherished tradition of humans. But what we do know is that it's easy to over consume. And we do know that while there are healthful properties in the liquid of wine due to the fermentation, it pulls things out of the red grape skin or pulls things out of the barley hops in the case of beer, like xanthohumerol in beer or resveratrol in red wine. The fact of the matter is that none of the benefits that you get from any alcoholic beverages come from the ethanol, the alcohol itself. The thing you get the buzz from does nothing for your health. Okay. Some of the other things that happen to be in the broth of the fermentation might be good for you. And so that's something that, oh, well, they've found that. And I think recently there was research showing that, even one glass of red wine could have an impact on brain health as well. And I think that, we have to be, I'm really careful about not chucking a spear, at every food that, we want to kind of malign for a health reason. I think wine is a cherished tradition. Alcohol is a cherished tradition, but people should know that the benefits of it, and it's okay to have a glass or two every now and then. But I think that the people who really go after it hard, look, besides the obvious liver disease and the problems of nutrition and the brain health, I mean, alcohol is a toxin to your brain. We do want to actually be mindful about the amounts that are consumed. Processed meats are another food product that actually are classed as a carcinogen by the World Health Organization. Now, what kind of processed meats are we talking about? We're not talking about the air-cured salami from Sardinia, that have been made in the same way for thousands of years that people eat sparing amounts of, as part of a more well-balanced Mediterranean traditional meal. I'm talking about the deli foods. You go in there and they're slicing stuff, from a big lump that looks nothing like the animal from which it came. Yeah. And some of these cured sausages, if you visit a sausage factory, I had a patient once who actually worked as an inspector in a commercial sausage plant. And he told me that he used to have to change his boots every month, rubber boots, walking in there, because the stuff that splashed out of the pool in which the sausages were essentially embalming it for preservatives and for flavorings would actually dissolve the sole of his rubber boot. Oh, man. That made such an impression on me. I'm still talking about it 20 years later.
Yeah, and we're sort of removed from that process, aren't we? We don't see that. We don't see that on videos. We just see the nice packaging and the clever marketing copy on there. And so I think that's really, really important. And I really like the way you made that distinction there. Also, when talking about things like alcohol or anything, it depends not just on that one thing. It depends on everything else that's going on in your life as well. We like to take these things in isolation, good or bad. It's like, well, it kind of depends, doesn't it? In our first conversations together, which if people haven't heard, I'd highly recommend they go back and listen to. One of the things I really liked about your approach was you said, well, let's put into our body foods that support these 5 defense systems. And if we can do that and support them, we raise the bar, we become more resilient. Therefore, we've got more headroom to actually deal with the insults that are going to come in life, whether that's DNA insults from pollution, or whether it's the odd thing that we creep into our diet that we probably know isn't the best thing for us, but we just fancy it now and again. And I really like that approach. And I know we're starting off this conversation focusing on some of the things to avoid. We're very quickly going to get onto the things that people can put in. But yeah, I really, really appreciate that.
The most important thing that we as doctors can do is to listen to our patients and hear them out and try to understand where they're coming from and what's important to them. I always ask my patients, what do you eat? What do you like to eat? What brings you joy when it comes to food? Though that question usually can elicit an answer. Like I'm very careful not to ask that question judgmentally. What kind of negative foods how much for steak do you eat? Like, I never ask that. I always sort of say, like, tell me about what do you enjoy eating? What brings you joy? What are some of the favorite things that you like to eat? And, again, it's that conversation that invites someone to look deeply within them. I think that, when I was a kid, I studied martial arts, and one of the greatest martial artists ever was Bruce Lee, who I actually read a lot of his writings. He wrote in a philosophical sort of way, and he wrote one of the most important things that if to succeed in life, whether it's in martial arts or otherwise, is to know yourself, to truly know yourself. And I think that so often we get distracted. We don't have that opportunity to ask ourselves something simple like, so if we had a choice, what would we want to eat? What brings us joy? And my strong belief is if we want people to get on a better diet, to get them started and to keep them going on it, we want them to actually feel like it's not a heavy lift. It's something that's doable. And I think there's nothing easier than to say, hey, you know what? Something that you already brings you pleasure and joy, something that you enjoy to eat already is healthy. So let's start with those things because you already know you love them. So in my book, Eat to Beat Disease, I have lists of like 200 some foods. I always tell people, have my book, get a Sharpie. Okay. I say a Sharpie, like the marker, permanent marker, because it's permanent. You have to make a commitment. All right. Take a Sharpie, a black Sharpie, and circle the foods that you enlist that you already like. No, actually that you love. All right. And I don't care if it's just one or two. Almost everyone I've met has been able to circle like 10 of them. Or more. But if you find a food that you already love, that's healthy and good for you, that activates your health defenses, you are already way ahead of the game.
Love that. Very empowering approach to people. Oils. Oils are something that can cause a lot of confusion. I know you're a big fan of olive oil. I want to talk about olive oil and why it's so beneficial. But before we get to olive oil, in the spirit of the kind of foods that we should think about limiting when we are in our supermarket or our grocery store and we're looking around to purchase oils to cook food in, to sprinkle on food, to pour on our salads, what kind of oils should we try and avoid? And then what sort of oils should we try and buy instead?
So this, like the debate about artificial sweeteners, is a loaded topic. And so I want to just start, this component of our conversation by saying the jury is still very much deliberating what oils are harmful to you and are most harmful to you. But I think that it's less controversial what oils are better for you and good for you. I want to, for your listeners, I want to kind of give people some real practical things and not just kind of dive into the science of petroleum products, which is what oils are. Let's talk about this. Rule number one, regardless of what oil you actually have, what I would say is don't have too much of it because oils are fats and fats can be healthier, but there really isn't such a thing as a healthy fat that you should like drink lots of it every single day. Okay. So the point is that there are healthier oils, but we should all limit the amount of oil that we actually intake into our body. All right. Number one. Number two is that, and this is actually broadly speaking, is don't reuse your oil. Okay. Most oils that are reused, when we heat them to cook, whether we're actually, again, deep frying is generally something that's not very healthy. The process of deep frying actually changes the natural chemicals that make up oil in the oil itself, and then paint it onto the food, stick it onto the food. So we're eating some of the changed chemicals when we actually eat deep fried food. Now, look, I've had some awesome fish and chips when I visited England before. And again, as we talked about, every now and then, if you spend most of your time shoring up your health defenses, raising your own bar, having a rare treat is totally fine. But When you fry things in hot oil, you're also changing the chemical structure of things. That entire browning, golden browning, crisping of food actually changes the chemical structure of the food itself, and in ways that are potentially carcinogenic. And so just need to be careful about that. The third, so I think, like reusing oil, here's the thing that's kind of like a little risky. You go to a restaurant to eat, you have no idea if they're reusing their oil over and over and over again. I mean, think about in Asian restaurants, whether it's an Indian restaurant or a Chinese restaurant, they've got these gigantic vats where they're frying tasty little bits up, but they may be reusing that oil for days. So reused oil, not good for you, for sure. And the stuff that's fried in oil can also change in time. So let's start now talking about just like the properties of oils themselves. This is where I think, rather than kind of walk into the quicksand of trying to say, is palm oil better than corn oil? Is coconut oil dangerous for you? Like we can wade into that jungle with, but I think you need a machete to cut your way out of it. And so the best way to think about it, to help give clarity is, are there any healthier oils to use and how to use them? And this is where I think olive oil really stands out. Number one, it's part of a healthy pattern of eating that's been revered for thousands of years. And that's in the traditional Mediterranean diet. And the olives are seasonal, they're pressed. The extra virgin olive oil contains not just fat, monounsaturated fatty acids, which are better for your body and less damaging for your cardiovascular health. But there's a lot of polyphenols that come from the olive itself. Now, a lot of people don't understand this, but when you look at olive oil, the reason we say extra virgin olive oil, EVOO, that's what supermarkets and what restaurants are proud to use now, is because it's not just fat. It contains the polyphenols from the oil. So if you were to actually, by the way, this is a good experiment to do for your listeners, buy a little container of olives from your grocery store, de-pit it, make it easy for yourself. And literally, take it home and take a heavy glass, or take a board, like a heavy cutting board, and press those olives yourself. And you'll actually see, if you press hard enough, you'll see some oil come out of it. Now, in an olive oil factory, I mean, that's so you can actually appreciate where your food comes from, where your olive oil comes from. Now, when you actually press it, you'll see that you've crushed the olives. And some of the bits from the olives are actually in the olive oil. The reason that olive oil tastes so good, it's got that, kind of peppery, vegetal kind of quality to it. It's got an umami flavor. It's not because the fat is flavorful. It's because the bits of olives that were crushed in there are actually in there flavoring it. Now, those bits and the stuff that comes from the meat of the olives contain the polyphenols, one of which is hydroxytyrosol. Hydroxytyrosol sounds like a very complicated chemical name. Your listeners don't need to memorize it by any means, but you should know that comes from the olive. Now, olive oil will have some of it, only about 20% of it. But if you actually press that olive, 80% goes into the olive water, and it's stuck in the pulp. And so one of the things that I always say is that, if you really love olive oil and you want to get the most out of it, just eat the whole olive, and you can actually cut up an olive and you'll get a little bit of fat, you'll get all that flavor, and you'll get a lot more of the polyphenol.
If you enjoyed watching that clip, here's another powerful clip that I think you will also really enjoy.
The whole idea of reducing sugar by just adding unlimited amounts of these chemicals has to be thought through, and we should be weaning people off ultra sweetened products, which make them more likely, particularly kids, to seek sugar.